Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving up some of your precious time as preschool educators. You might be having lunch, I suppose, at the moment, to join us for the next 20 or so minutes as we have a look at what STEM in preschool might look like. So our experiences of the Early Learning STEM Australia project has shown us that children can and do engage in STEM activities in meaningful ways. And it has also shown us in our working with over 100 preschool educators that you're the critical ingredient in the children's STEM experience. So what we want to do in the next 20 minutes or so is just talk about what you might already be doing in your centres, and then just looking at some ways that we might be able to value add. So before we go any further, just like to introduce myself and Tracy and Ross. So I'm Kevin Larkin. So I was previously a primary school teacher for 15 or so years, and then deputy principal for about 15 years. But for the last 7 years, I've been very lucky to be working on the ELSA project with colleagues and friends at the University of Canberra. And my particular interest is how young children might demonstrate and learn about logical reasoning. Tracy?
Hi everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the lands upon which we meet today as well. So for me, that's the Ngunnawal people here in the Canberra region. And I'd also like to extend and recognise all the lands upon all the Indigenous and First Persons nations that we meet upon as a group today as well. So as Kev said, I'm Tracy. I work at the University of Canberra. I too came from a primary teaching background and really passionate about children learning maths across all age levels. So that's my role here at the university, and I was also part of the ELSA program and part of that development a few years ago now, but really proud of what we've developed through that program. Thanks, Ross.
Hi, yeah, my name's Ross. I'm Communications Manager at University of Canberra, specifically for ELSA, and I'll be in the chat if anyone needs anything today. Otherwise, I'll probably hide my video so you can see the stars.
Thanks, Ross. And yeah, apologies for not welcome to country. I'm on Benowa land on the Gold Coast. I'm the northernmost member of the team. Okay, so Ross will guide us through. He's driving the presentation, and we're just using Prezi. So what might STEM already look like for you? So for us, it's about skills and Okay, thanks, Ross. So what it might already look like. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, with those letters, STEM, indicating that there might be some integration between those things. Now, although we'll talk about STEM, we think about STEM a little differently to many others. And if you've been to other professional development, what we think might be a little bit different, but more on that later. But regardless of how we might define or not define STEM, you're already doing STEM. So why is STEM important? There's been quite a bit of research about why STEM is important. We think it's important that it's introduced in preschool, firstly, because it's a way that can help the young children that you work with understand their world and how it works. So that's the fundamental reason. Doing it early helps them to develop positive attitudes towards STEM. And our research has shown that children can, if they're given negative experiences of STEM, can develop attitudes that are very difficult to change. What you do in your preschool translates to confidence and success in STEM at school, and on a longer term scale, it prepares them for jobs of the future. But we're much more interested about the here and now. So let's look at two examples of the sorts of things you might already be doing, and we'll look at them through a STEM lens. So the first example is water play. So I proudly and recently became a story park grandfather. And so now I get, I'm sure a lot of you use Story Park, now I get notices about what my grandson's up to at preschool. And one that came recently was water play. So I'm sure this is something that you do quite regularly in your centres. So we could have a look at this water play activity, and there'd be lots of cooperation happening, and there'd be quite a lot of social interaction happening, and they're very important things in the development of children. But what sort of science, technology, engineering and maths might we see? Well, science could be which type of containers hold water better. Which way does water flow? Is there a way we can get water to flow uphill? Children can do that through play and experimentation. If we wanted to have a look at technology, perhaps you could be using some digital device, an iPad or a camera, as the educator has done here, to take some photos, but they could be simple videos, so we could use digital technology, but we might also use design technology or materials technology and have a look at, well, which sorts of materials slow water down, or which sorts of materials can speed water up. Engineering, we might look at building some structures that can move the water around. You might have a nice water wall feature. And then the mathematics would be looking at the different sorts of containers and comparing their size and doing some direct and indirect comparisons. So there's an activity I'm sure a lot of you are doing, rich in STEM. Tracy will talk through another activity that you're likely doing as well.
Thanks, Kevin. So I am a big proponent of spatial reasoning, and one of the biggest predictors of moving into a STEM career post-schooling is your level of spatial reasoning. And one way we can really promote spatial reasoning is through block play in the building corner. And it's definitely something that you do regularly, and lots of children enjoy playing with blocks. But let's have a think about what sorts of STEM ideas might be evident when they're playing with blocks. So we might think about the science behind why some blocks slide more easily than others. We might think about the different, from a technology perspective, from a materials technology perspective, what are the different materials that those blocks can be made of? Does that impact or change on how they work together? Can we use blocks of different materials together? If we think about an engineering perspective, students can build simple structures according to plans, or they might even draw a plan, a 2D representation of something that they have built. Something there in the example picture, experimenting with ramps. Does it matter how high or steep or low or the gradient of those ramps? So getting children to look at and experiment and play with those. And then from a mathematics perspective, as I said, the different sorts of spatial properties that we have with different blocks, which ones slide more easily, which ones stack more easily or roll more easily. Do we need a certain number of blocks to create a particular building that we want to design? So there's sorts of different things that even just within one little activity there's a whole range of different sort of STEM experiences that are going on there. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Tracy. So in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about how we look at STEM is slightly different to how you may have had it presented to you. So our first difference is sort of in our idea of STEM practices. So for us, STEM is about skills and practices rather than content knowledge in math, science, technology and engineering. So content knowledge is important, but we get at it through the play that the children are doing and the practices that they're doing. And we believe that children will learn STEM best by doing STEM. So we don't see it as those four separate subjects. And in avoiding seeing it as four separate subjects, we avoid lots of arguments about whether it should be STEM or STEAM. So should we have arts in there, or should it be STREAM? Should we have arts and reading, or should it be STEM-M? Should we have STEM and mathematics? So for us, it's about practices, doing STEM, and that gets us to doing STEM in play-based ways. And it also allows you as educators to use some intentional teaching moments. That's a new emphasis, I know, in the EYLF version 2 to support the children's play and their STEM learning. So we want to, I guess, help you tweak some of your current activities that might make them more STEM focused. Thanks, Ross.
So before we talk about what STEM practices are, or what we describe as STEM practices, I want you to think about the different types of occupations that you view as STEM-based. Now, our interpretation of those occupations might be slightly different than what you're expecting. Maybe you're thinking about people mostly in like white lab coats as scientists, people working at Google who are technologists, or even wearing a hard hat as like an engineer. And they're probably mostly male, let's be honest. And one of those old adages that you've probably heard along the way, you can't be what you can't see. And so for a lot of the children that we work with, those sort of higher level STEM-based occupations, they don't see those in their everyday life. So we want children to be accessible, we want children to have STEM idols and STEM practitioners that are actually accessible to all children. And so our example there is a horticulturalist. So as a science specialist, what species are going to grow well in the area where you live? What sorts of insects do we want to attract and repel that might help with pollination? How many seed packets do I need to complete and fill in this area so that we have a really lush growth? How high will the plants grow? Does that matter where I'm planting them? Is there something that's going to stop them growing to their full height? Then you can think about a builder. How can I use recyclable materials in the building? How much of a different particular material might I need? How can I control the temperature within the building in energy efficient ways? Those are all very STEM-based ways of thinking. The other two we have there is an architect. So thinking about that, different representations and viewpoints of how we visualise and manage to see the buildings that we're building, scale and plans, and then a surfboard designer, which is our sort of off-the-cuff one a little bit. But if we think about what they have to do in the ways that they're designing and creating surfboards, they need to think about tide and wave conditions in the area that they're building for, materials that help with buoyancy, how they can make it safer to use in terms of the fins and things like that, and ropes, and length and weight requirements for different riders. So there's a whole range of different things that these STEM practitioners actually think about in their everyday life that we can associate for children. And I just want you to think about other examples that you might think of in your own local community who could be seen as STEM practitioners as well. Thanks, Ross.
I'm not sure if the chat's fully functional, so I'll work on that, but maybe we'll keep going, Kev.
Okay, so I think it's still you, Trace, the STEM practices. So next slide, Ross. Yeah.
So in the next few slides, we're going to discuss a different way of thinking about STEM. So we kind of indicated and hinted at that in the STEM practitioners that we presented. But this one, we want to think about it in your context of a preschool and working with young children, and how you can make small adjustments to the existing activities that you already do just to make them a little bit more STEM focused. So we want to talk about our ideas of a STEM practice, which are the ideas, methods and values that underpin STEM ways of thinking. If we think about building a sandpit, for example, or water play from the earlier, then an idea might be that we need to create some sort of sand or some sort of sandpit that might hold water. The method might be, how do we go about that? What sorts of tools might we use? What sorts of critical thinking, what sorts of information processing do we need to understand in order to make that happen? And then what's the sorts of values that we might need? Can we do it alone, or do we need to work with others? Do we need to be persistent? Do we need to think creatively and use our imagination to how that might be developed? So the focus on ideas, methods and values sits really comfortably alongside the being, belonging and becoming focus of the EYLF. And I just wanted to share with you very quickly a video from our ELSA program where Luke Carroll from Play School talks about the STEM practices.
STEM is science, technology, engineering and mathematics. The ELSA program offers an expanded view of STEM through the concept of STEM practices. STEM practices are the ideas, methods and values that underpin engagement and understanding of STEM. STEM ideas are ways of thinking, such as problem finding and solving and asking questions. STEM methods are ways of doing, which include using tools to produce artifacts, understanding information in images, and representing thinking visually. STEM values are ways of being and relating, such as curiosity, imagination, collaboration, and persistence. STEM practices are also closely aligned to the early years learning framework. Applying STEM practices in preschool and at home can help young children develop better understandings about how their world works. This approach helps young children develop positive attitudes towards STEM.
Okay, so thanks for that, Luke Carroll. That was amazing. Over to you, Kev.
Okay, yep, just wait for Ross. Thanks, Ross. So we're very aware that in your centres you're responsible for reporting back on your EYLF practices and outcomes through various mechanisms. So next slide, Ross. So how might our approach to these practices marry in with the EYLF? So we see really strong connections really at outcome 4, children as learners. And although the language is slightly different that we use, in the EYLF, it's that children develop dispositions. So we might say values. And the ones in the EYLF, you know better than me, curiosity, cooperation, confidence, etc. So the EYLF also encourages that children develop a range of learning and thinking skills and processes. So we would say ideas, such as problem solving, inquiry, experimentation, hypothesizing, etc. Where we see our methods is in the evidence that children show that demonstrate their dispositions and their range of learning and thinking skills. And that's noted in the evidence section of outcome 4. And some examples, not exhaustive list, are using digital tools, making presentations and using representations. So we think our approach is solid educationally, but it also marries your responsibilities to be reporting back on children's performance and their learning outcomes. So Tracy will have a look at the 18 that we think are important in our project.
So these are the 18 that we developed that align with the ELSA project that we developed. So under ideas, you can see things like problem finding and proposing. So it's not just about problem solving, it's actually about identifying where problems exist and then working through a solution to those. What sorts of different evidence do we need in order to support that idea? Different ways of designing and building and exploring and challenging. The methods that we align with are that generation of ideas, how we process information. A big one in the early years is that appropriate language and vocabulary and trying to really build that around experiences that the children are engaging with. What sorts of different tools do we need to produce the things that we want to design or create? And that thinking critically. And as we said, which the values which align very closely with the EYLF, that curiosity, fairness, imagination, creativity, teamwork, and persistence.
Thanks, Tracy. So what might be some of the ideas, methods, and values? Can be those 18, or it could be other ones that you use to help plan activities for the children in your centre. So this is a big question, and we're getting towards the end of our time. So, you know, sometime over the weekend when you're not thinking about the kids all the time, and you can think a little bit about, you know, how your centres run, yeah, just sort of mull over, I guess, what ideas, methods, and values support what you're doing. Maybe there was some in the chart there that you could think about incorporating. And then the second part of the question, which we haven't got here, is then, as the pedagogical leader in your centre, what sort of intentional teaching moments can you provide that might give opportunities to, say, problem find, and for children to process information and to use teamwork in the activities. And the next two slides, Tracy will take you through one, I'll take you through another one, of how our ideas, methods, and values might easily match with things you're, I suspect, already doing. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Kev. So again, as Kev said, what do these STEM practices look like in action, perhaps in your preschool or centre? We tend to try to focus intentionally on having sort of one main idea, one method, and one value, although there's opportunities there where there might be more than one evident in the activities that you're doing. So if we take a look at the I am a robot activity, so one thing that we might do as a sort of, I'll call it a pre-coding type activity, is students understanding how to follow and give really clear instructions. And so an activity that we have done previously is getting the children to move as a robot and having other children actually move them around the room like a robot. And so one of the STEM ideas there might be exploring. How do we move? How do we give instructions? The STEM method might be about processing information. When they say go left, which way is that? And which way do I have to move? And how do I move? And a STEM value might be persistence in trying to get to the end goal of where you're trying to move your robot to. So that's just a little example of one activity. But of course, depending upon your learning program, you could also think about how that one activity could be talking about using appropriate language and vocabulary, the clearness and the clarity of the instructions given. It could be working on teamwork. So there's a couple of different ways that you could look at that. But again, depending upon the intentionality of the activity and the focus, that would be up to you to decide as the educator. Thanks, Kev.
Thanks, Tracy. And then another example, so Tracy's let me talk about this one, back to the building corner. So in this particular activity, perhaps children draw or take a photo of a building that they've done. And then the task for their friends is to, only through the drawing or the photo, build the same structure that their friend has built. So a STEM idea there might be designing. So the initial child has to design the building, think about the structure they want to make, and then build it. The STEM method is encoding and decoding information. So that's quite sort of a complex explanation for first person thinking about what happens and putting it into the plan, second person seeing what's in the plan and decoding it. So if you think of IKEA, you know, I don't like to think of IKEA, but if you do think of IKEA, you get the plan, someone's encoded that information, and then I have to try to build a coffee table at home unsuccessfully. So that's encoding and decoding. And then a STEM value might be teamwork. We're going to do this together. Now, as Tracy said before, you could do that same activity, same stimulus, and this time the focus is on using tools. So what tools do we need to make the initial drawing? And it could be on problem posing. So what we don't suggest you do is try to do all 18 in every activity. There will be, we think though, in any rich activity, and I'm sure that you're doing rich activities, there'll easily be an idea and a method and a value. Tracy.
Thanks, Kev. So that's essentially our presentation for today. But just what would you like to know more about from either this presentation, things in future presentations? I know Maria talked about diversity in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective, so there could be some ways that we could help you think about that from a STEM perspective as well. Or if there's any information about the ELSA team and what we do, if there's any questions or comments at the moment. I know that's been a really quick sort of brief introduction to the philosophical and pedagogical underpinnings of the ELSA program, but just hopefully it stimulates you to think a little bit differently about the things that you're already doing. And just by focusing on those STEM practices, we often promote that engagement with children, and that builds confidence and positive dispositions. Rebecca, yes, I think the information about our STEM practices is definitely on the ELSA program website. Sustainability, more about the programs and further professional development for educators, lots more examples. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, the sustainability one sits nicely with what we're trying to do. Yeah.
More practical examples, yep. And we might even be able to provide some video examples and sort of narrate over that where those STEM practices are evident. Ways to share with families and have them get involved, 100%. One of the things that we have within, and which we will talk more about in further webinars, is our way of actually involving families and getting, you know, a STEM practitioner from your local community who may not be the stereotypical STEM person, and getting them to chat to the children about what they do and how they do it. Definitely a way to get, you know, a family member or a community member involved in the centre.
Thanks, Tracy. We might just go to that next slide and we can sort of wrap up this this webinar. Hang on, I've got my chat covering what I'm supposed to. Yeah, so we just wanted to say thank you for giving up your time. We realise time is very valuable. Hopefully you've had a little break, maybe had some lunch while you're listening to the presentation. But what we've tried to do is really talk about what we're confident that you're already doing, and then just look for some value adds and maybe look at it slightly differently with that ideas, methods and values. So we hope to see you online again for future presentations. So no real spoilers, but there could be something around intentional teaching in STEM or children's literature in STEM. Spatial reasoning in STEM is probably going to get a run from one of our other colleagues. So we'd encourage you, when you have time, to explore the ELSA program for your centre. So it sort of answers some of those questions that people had before, and this information is freely available for you to have a look at. The website's there, elsaprogram.com.au. We've also got an email address there, team@elsa.edu.au. Ross loves getting those emails and he'll get back to you. But on behalf, I guess, of Tracy and Ross, again, thank you for joining us. I'm back here again on Monday. You can come again if you want, and Tracy will be back. Tracy will be back on Friday, but then we'll have more information for you about upcoming webinars. So have a great weekend, guys, and thank you for the work you do with our youngest citizens.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.